Welcome to the AgEmerge Podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monty Bottens. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Today, we welcome Greg Gunthorp. Greg is a fourth-generation farmer who's clearly a critical thinker. Greg has reimagined what livestock production and meat marketing looks like on their farm. His understanding of the history of ag production and his ability to glean knowledge from that history has given him discernment and a great perspective on how to manage and lead their operation. Greg says he likes to act locally and think globally. And that really defines the way Greg sees things. He has both that 30,000-foot big picture view clear down to the minute details. This is an exciting listen, so let's jump right in.
Well, welcome everyone to this episode of the AgEmerge Podcast. I know a lot of people are oftentimes upset with kind of what the status quo is, and they complain about what it is and wish it would change. And today's guest is not satisfied with that, I would say. He knows what the status quo is, and he has done some very pioneering efforts. You're going to enjoy learning all the things that he's done to try to change that status quo. So a fellow farmer and a fellow pasture-raised protein farmer, too, from Indiana, I'd like to welcome Greg Gunthorp.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
Don't you think that's fair, Greg? You're not very satisfied with the status quo, and you definitely do something about it.
Oh, for sure. Not satisfied with the status quo. You know, my opinion is that I like to act locally and think globally. So we've made a lot of changes here at the farm. And then, I also do a fair amount of advocacy work at the state, national, and international level. But, here at the farm, my family been pasture pig producers for at least 4 generations. Wow. And my dad in '94 said that the hog market for the independent family hog farmer was over. And, I spent some time at the land grant university and come back, and my goal was I wanted to raise pigs for my life. And I said, I'm not done raising pigs. So my wife and I went off on our own in 1994. And 4 years later, I found out that my dad was right. The hog market for the independent hog farmer was finished. And once again, I said, I'm not done raising pigs. And, that same year, we were fortunate enough to connect with a restaurant in Chicago, Charlie Trotter. Wine Spectator magazine rated him that same month that we sold him our first pig, rated him #1 in the world for food and wine. So it's a little bit of luck and I think a lot of fate. We made the connection and went from being just a live pig farmer to selling pork. And we became part owners of a processing plant up in Michigan. Failed miserably on that. We were part owners for about 3 years. And I said, if we put a processing plant on the farm, I could manage the processing plant, manage the farm, and still be able to go off and do sales and deliveries rather than it being in 3 locations. And so we built a processing plant on the farm, and we've been direct marketing since 1998. And it's not always went smooth, but it's been an amazing journey. We have product in Disney. We have product at O'Hare Airport. We have product served to the Chicago Cubs at the clubhouse. So it's been we have some exciting and cool things that we do. And, it's for sure not a fan of the status quo, I guess. And we did something about it.
Well, I love that because your dad, he definitely is a genie, that's for sure. He knew exactly what was coming because in 1998, I was part of a Case IH dealership here in Henry County, Illinois, and we're the self-proclaimed hog capital of the world. So up until about 1998, there was still hogs out on the fields. Not many compared to what it was 20 years before that, but there was still a fair amount. And our local price got down to 8 cents. And it just gutted the industry. I mean, if you weren't in a barn, or if you didn't have a modern barn, you were done. And it really hurt our business, because a lot of farmers were, they're row crop farmers getting equipment, but they also had the hogs too. So they weren't, mega farms at that time. They were relying on balanced income, and it just really shut them down from what they could do. So it affected our business and those kind of things. So it's interesting to see that, you started out, and in 1998, direct marketing. Had Al Gore invented the internet yet? I mean, I
No.
mean that and the Zuckerberg hadn't created social media. So what that had to have been a little tough. How did you go about doing that and have the wild idea that, hey, I think I'm going to sell what I make?
Well, the short version of how I got there is that, growing up on a diversified family farm, we were involved in 4-H and FFA when I was young, and I was actually quite involved in FFA and Future Farmers of America. And I got the opportunity to be an exchange student after I graduated from high school. I spent the summer in England and Scotland in 1988 and stayed on 11 different family farms, started in southern Scotland, ended up in southern England. And 2 of those farms that I'd spent a week on each one of them, 2 of those farms were making their living direct marketing, selling at farmers markets, selling to little meat shops, selling to restaurants. And at the time, and I wish Mom would have saved the letter, because I wrote home, I thought it was the craziest thing in the world. And lo and behold,
now you're doing the craziest thing in the world.
Yeah. 10 years later, the market crashes, and I tell my wife, I'm like, if you pick up the magazines, you can just start to see that this is starting to get trendy, or looks like it's gonna get trendy. Trends back then, before the internet and that, used to take 10 years to go from the big cities in Europe out to the countryside, and 10 years from there to come to our coast, and 10 years from the coast to get to the big cities, and 10 years to get out to rural America. That's sped up a lot now with the internet and people seeing what's going on. But I said, I think this thing might actually happen here. And you could just start to see guys like Bill Nyman were already selling to Alice Waters at Chez Panisse. You'd see that in the newspaper or magazine every once in a while. Guys like John Jameson out on the other coast was selling to like the Watergate and into a few places in New York. And I said, I think we can eke out a living selling to some big name chefs in the big city. And I almost swore there. Probably shouldn't do that. I think there's 2 people on the planet at the time that didn't think I was the craziest person ever. And that was my wife and my sister. Everyone else, whole rest of my family, everyone I mentioned it to, when I said, we're going to make a living getting our pigs processed and we're going to sell them to restaurants in Chicago, thought I was absolutely bonkers. It gained traction for a while. We were doubling every year there. We were selling about 3 pigs a week when we first started. And as a commodity producer, we were doing 1,500, 2,000 a year. It took quite a while till we got back to the levels that we were doing as a commodity producer. And it didn't take me very long to realize that the biggest bottleneck in the system and the biggest impediment was going to be the processing, our ability to actually get the number of animals that we wanted processed and then get them cut and packaged for 3, 4, 5-star chefs. So we become involved in a processing plant really quick, and I was a deer in the headlights. The first 6 months, that was like, whoa, we fully understand processing now and the what's all involved in that. It's a highly capital management, labor intensive business, but we went into it not knowing any of that. But it's worked. It grew really, really fast. It doesn't grow it's not growing as fast now, but it got crazy. Had we filled out the paperwork in 2011, we would have been on the Inc.'s 5,000 list. We would have been somewhere in between 16 to 1,700 fastest growing independent businesses in the United States. And it got a little crazy for a while. And running a business that was expanding that fast was really, really fun.
Yeah, right. Running the processing and the production and still doing the deliveries, like you said. So I'm glad you had time to sit down with us here today. I'm surprised we didn't get you while you're in the truck,
Oh, yeah. Friday mornings on the farm is pig slaughter day. So, I could have put a hands-free on and a video in the corner. We could have harvested some pigs while we were on the podcast.
There you go. It could have been multi-purpose. So talk about, processing. A lot of people become aware of that since COVID in the general population, and other farmers who are trying to get, some beef done for their family or friends. Those kind of situations have noticed a problem with processing and it being full and those kind of things. And like you said, you were partners with one, and you brought it back to the farm. And there's lots of roads we can go down here and take the next 2 hours to talk about, but and how you can do on-farm processing and all the regulations involved with it. But how you saw that was important to happen, and a lot of people again just complain about not having processing, but you did it. So walk us through that process of what that's been like for you to do on-farm processing and why that's so critical to your brand and your farm.
Okay. Yeah. Let me make one comment and go back just a little bit further back behind that, just to explain this whole thing, because those of us from rural America, if we stop and think about this, our community had one that was an example. The plant that we became part owners of was an example. Lots of communities had those little locker plants, and there was there's actually three kinds. There were ones that had a little truck and actually had a small wholesale route, and in lots of communities there was one of those that hung on well into the 80s, some of them into the 90s. There were a few little ones that mostly just did not for sale processing. Some of them did it under inspection, but it almost all went back to the farmers for their own freezer, for their own personal consumption. And then the remainder of the little plants were the ones that did the animals that the big guys didn't want to touch. The off-weight pigs, the cull dairy cows that wouldn't make the trip to a long processing plant. And, I think when people stop and think about this whole processing, they don't give any thought to why it is so complicated, that there are not processors for, farmer market farmers, direct marketing farmers, ones that want to sell to upscale restaurants. There was a few USDA plants around, and there still are. There were none left that had wholesale routes, that were cutting for restaurants, that were doing upscale. Those were literally all gone. We've had to completely rebuild the processing infrastructure in the United States. There were not processors in the 90s. There wasn't even into the early 2000s that processed for farmers that wanted to do farmers markets. There just absolutely weren't. Those processors put stuff in a box for a person to take back home to their freezer. So, I very quickly realized, if we're going to sell to restaurants and they all want their stuff cut slightly different, they all want it packaged slightly different, they all have a huge expectation that quality is impeccable, they have a huge expectation that shelf life is phenomenal. I realized really, really quick that we were not going to be able to find a processor that could do that. Probably would have been a little bit easier to find a processor that would have done just for farmers markets or just for stores that would have been frozen vacuum packed product, but absolutely would have been impossible to find a processor that would let us vary the number of pigs that we brought in, want them cut completely different each week, and want them back out the door quick enough so that they could be delivered fresh to restaurants, so that they could still get a week's shelf life out of them, so we didn't have to go to Chicago 5 days of the week. And so we bought into a processing plant, and like I said, we were a deer in the headlights. USDA regulations aren't really that bad now once I know it. But, it's, you take the regulations, the directives, the notices, and you stack them up. They're about waist high. But most of them make sense. And, most of the inspectors haven't read them, just like most of the people in the industry haven't read them. I actually have. I've got a pretty good memory, so I can tell you what most of them are, but we're definitely not going down that rabbit hole. But, it's the process basically is that you fill out a grant of inspection with your district office. You wait for your circuit supervisor to come out. He has a little checklist. I share the checklist with people. USDA doesn't share the checklist, but I share the checklist with people so they can see what they're actually looking for. And when USDA finally checks off all the boxes, and it's mostly paperwork so that they know you have a program in place for it, once they finally check off those boxes, they send you out a USDA inspector. And, the half of the battles, getting them to check all the boxes. The lifetime battle is the second checklist, which is all of your regulatory compliance that they're ensuring that you meet every day. And, just like everything else in farming, there's a certain scale that's required to be able to justify processing plants. And I'd actually say that our farm is probably too small to justify that, especially too small to justify that without me and the family having to wear too many hats. And at the end of the day, I think that's one of the biggest hurdles. It's not building the processing plant. It's building the processing plant and the people that own it still having any kind of quality of life. Because when you deal with live animals and perishable product, there's something that needs to be done 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if your business is not big enough, do you justify somebody that's responsible for some of those other things? And you run a 2-shift processing plant so that you can get stuff out the door and get it delivered to restaurants in Chicago, Indianapolis, Ann Arbor. You can have an awful lot of days of the week and an awful lot of the hours of the week committed big time. So,
yeah, absolutely. It's it's a lot of coordination to make that all happen because restaurants aren't too interested in frozen product, are they?
No, we've actually developed a clientele that will accept some thawed out product at certain times of the year, and we have a few customers that will take some frozen product. But by and large, yeah, restaurants want fresh product. They've been burnt too many times. They always tell people stuff doesn't come out of the freezer any better than it went in the freezer. And the meat and poultry industry has a horrible, horrible history of trying to sell something till its end of its expiration date is fresh, throwing it in the freezer. And then when that stuff comes out, it was at its end of its expiration date when it went in the freezer. It's beyond its expiration date by the time it thaws. So people have a justification between that and, if you're running a busy restaurant in the big city, you tend to not have enough workspace, let alone refrigeration space, to thaw things properly. And we all know that if you cook things from a partially frozen state, they don't cook the same way. You can't throw a chop on a grill that the center of it's frozen and get the thing to the exact desired doneness. And if you got a nice restaurant, you have to have consistency. So I mean, there's reasons that but there's also legitimate ways to that you package things, freeze them when they're processed, and thaw them correctly. And you'd have a hard time telling that apart. So we have some restaurants that are accepting of that, and then we have some that don't. And we slaughter pigs year round because of that. So, and we've worked out, we didn't realize it at the time before the pandemic, but we actually had a really good program, and I like to call it safety net marketing, where we have a avenue that this product goes into, And then we have another means that we can sell it. We have another means that we can turn it into something. And we have a means of what we can do with it if it goes in the freezer. And, we flipped that up on its head with COVID, but we're rebuilding that. So it's always something.
You have to have plan A, B, C, D, and then COVID comes in and you got to have, E through.
Oh, yeah.
Correct. So.
Yeah. And you got to kind of wad those up, throw them in the corner and start out with a new set of plans. And now it seems like with COVID that the letters and numbers of plans that you have to have is a lot deeper now.
Yeah. But no, that's good to hear, because I think, when you get into on the grass finished products with the ruminants, I think it's best to harvest them on green grass for the nutrient density portion of it. And, but the different market for direct to consumer, they can accept frozen, because way we're doing it, way a lot of producers do it is they cut, pack, freeze, at the processor by the individual cut. And then we do have some restaurants that will thaw and properly and deliver to, like you said. But that way, you know exactly, you really know how old that is. Then you have complete control of that.
Well, I think don't you think you're the best customers? In our case, for sure, the best customers completely understand that, get that, and would rather an animal was raised and harvested at the correct season rather than a fresh product out of season.
Yes, yes, it is. But there's a lot of conversation, a lot of training that needs to occur.
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, right.
The AgEmerge Podcast is brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. The ASN team is hands-on, digging in and invested in regenerative agriculture. Along with the proper plant nutrition and biologicals to boost your soil microbiome, we provide the ideas and implementation guidance to support you on your soil health journey. So stop farming the same way and contact Ag Solutions Network today at asn.farm.
So one thing I've gotten recently, quite a few requests, and this just popped in my head, but I've gotten some people asking about the aging process. Like, how long do you age? Worried about them being just hung, sides hung for 18 to 21 days prior to cut and pack, that being a concern. Have you run into any of that lately?
You're
on pork, but that was a question in regards to beef.
We're fortunate in regards to that. We don't have to age product, and in fact, it's probably best not to. I think our ideal dining experience on our pork and poultry is between 3 and 7 days. And we slaughter on Fridays and Mondays. It's delivered on Wednesday and Thursday, and most of it ends up being served on Friday and Saturday because those are the busiest days at the restaurant. So ours is actually intentional in that it's served on what I believe is because if you get too close to the slaughter date on pork and poultry, it's actually got a little bit more bite to it. And then, you obviously can get into quality issues as you go on the shelf life. I think most of the issues that farmers are facing on the beef side tends to be that these plants really weren't built for the capacities that they really need to run to justify the plant and have 3 weeks worth of beef hanging in a cooler. So there's a huge cost in cutting the capacity of that plant 33% or 66% by saying, hey, we've got 1 week's slaughter of beef. Let's just leave those hang for 2 more weeks. And you just cut the amount of rail space that they got to hang beef by a huge amount. And I think that's the biggest obstacle that beef guys face we've cut a few beef, raised just a few here and there. And personally, my favorite is I think there's cuts off from the beef that ought to be done fresh, the less than 6 days, less than the week, especially the stuff that goes into the hamburger. And then I think the steaks ought to be left there to age the 21 days. I think another thing that we don't stop and think about, and University of Wisconsin has done the research, this E. coli in beef is such a big concern now. That only happened after, the industry no longer aged beef for at least 6 days. University of Wisconsin research shows that 6 days in a cooler, as long as you keep the relative humidity below 90 degrees, you get a really, really good reduction in E. coli. You cut those things like the big guys do in 2 days and put them in a vacuum and pack and wet age them, and you get zero reduction on the E. coli. So, there's quality and food safety issues there.
And if anything, in the wet aging, you're creating a perfect microbial brew for them to survive. And multiply. So,
oh yeah,
exactly. The industry and that, okay, there's a great example of unintended consequences, right? So went to wet aging by primals so that we could reduce storage space. You can put primals on racks. Don't have to hang them on rails, and they can go a forklift and whatever, 50 foot high if you want, in boxes. And then the other thing is no shrink. That was the big sale. You get 1% shrink in wet aging, where you get 3 to 7 on dry aging. But the unintended consequences, the reason maybe we've lived as long as we did as humans is our ancestors hung them, and we're inadvertently getting rid of E. coli. Didn't even know they were doing it. So it's interesting when you change one thing, you change a lot of things there. Boy, I'll definitely look that up and dig into that. I think that's important for people to know.
Yeah, and I think the other thing.
No, go ahead.
The other thing that I think most people don't stop and think about, the loss of family farms is a topic that resonates with people, but the loss of the processing plants and the loss of skilled butchers is not a topic that generally people stop and think about. But that cutting them and wet aging them and putting them in boxes allowed the industry to destroy the unions. It allowed the industry to turn those jobs into something that a person literally comes in and does exactly the same one cut every single day. So it becomes a much lower skilled job than breaking down carcasses. And, the IVPs of the world, just decimated the small community packing plants that were union high paid jobs.
Mm-hmm. That is true. And normally owned by a local small business person that contributes back to the community. You alluded to it a little bit, poultry business. You did a lot of poultry at one time. You're not doing poultry today, are you? Or
we still do much smaller scale. We still do some turkeys. We'll do some ducks this year. We would do as many turkeys as we did before, but we quit chickens, and we no longer have a full-time chicken processing crew. 2020 was the last season for us to do chickens. We did about 120,000 broilers a year. So in some ways, a really big operation, when you consider pasture poultry. I would guess at one point, if we weren't the largest pasture poultry operation in the country, we were really close, because I think we were at one point when Will Harris was, when they were scaling down their chickens. At the time, Paul Grieve and Pasture Bird was scaling theirs up. But in 2020, we ended up with, being mostly a restaurant supplier before, and then chickens was by far the most labor per pound and per dollar of anything that we produced on the farm. And the labor market for us, and I think for lots of other people, just got really, really silly after COVID. And then we had as much as 68 pallets extra of frozen chicken in cold storage there in that third quarter in 2020. And I got way too many gray hairs and way too many sleepless nights and too much stress. It ended up working out completely fine. In the winter, our first part of the winter, January, February, for restaurant sales, normally always the slowest of the year by far. And it actually ended up being pretty steady. And we got rid of the chicken, but we decided it was just too much risk anymore. We were putting the whole farm at risk to continue with our chicken enterprise. And because of that, we had no choice but to scale down our turkey enterprise, because our turkey enterprise has always been highly seasonal on the farm. We've raised 2 groups of turkeys, one in the summer and then one for fresh birds for Thanksgiving. And we had no problem running them through the processing plant because we had 20 full-time employees that process chickens. And, if you process chickens, you can easily process turkey. And we could fit any amount in on virtually any week. Once you get rid of those 20 chicken processing employees, we got some really good employees in the plant, but they've got, year-round pork processing work to do. So it becomes kind of difficult to stuff in a highly seasonal poultry. And we're still trying to figure that out because I think we still have as many opportunities to sell as many turkeys as we used to, but I'm not sure that the labor situation is going to allow that anytime soon.
So really, just was it availability or cost of labor or both really drove your chicken decision?
It's both, but it was just as much availability as it was cost. I mean, granted, we had a hard time competing in the wholesale chicken business, so cost was for sure a factor. But Monday morning when you got 3,000 or 4,000 chickens sitting out there in crates ready to be harvested, which is the number that we normally always did them on Monday morning, and we'd be 3 to 6 people short. And me and my son and Antonio trying to fill in those extra positions. At some point, when I'm the person on the scalder and the plucker, and there's supposed to be 2 other people with me, and I got 4,000 chickens staring at me, and I'm doing it by myself, and my son's in the same scenario, and Antonio's in the same scenario. At some point, you're like, man, there's easier ways to kick yourself in the ass every day.
Oh, easier ways to poke your eyes out. I got you.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, I actually really like chickens, and I actually really like processing chickens. Processing chickens is kind of like that, what was it, rubric or whatever, the things that my kids did when they were in 6th grade, where you got to do this, that does that thing and that thing. Chicken processing, chicken slaughter is so much more that than pig slaughter is, because those shackles go by a person, and if there's not a chicken for that person to do their job, you literally just added that shackle time to the end of the day. So any one thing on the chicken processing lines not working, you got 20 people that are standing around. Where on pig slaughter, we're doing that a lot more manual on a rail. And if one piece isn't working, the other guys just slide down and help finish cleaning up the pigs, or they're doing something else. Our pig is slaughter is just so much more consistent if something breaks or if a person doesn't show up, where chickens is so much more and I kind of really like that. It's the how many plates can you spin at a time and keep them going, and it's really, really cool to see when it all clicks. But it's when you got 3 to 6 people short, it's kind of like you're starting to spin plates and you're that guy at the circus and all of the plates are starting to fall and there's not a doggone thing you can do about it sometimes, so.
Yeah, that's for sure. What do you ever foresee something changing, getting back into the pastured poultry business, or you think that was a great thing to do in the past?
I could actually see in the future, if we figure the labor out, I don't think it'll be chickens or turkeys. I actually could see us doing those kind of numbers of ducks, and I could see them fitting in with our solar sheep enterprise, as providing the nutrients for our grazing operation there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that's a little more specialty and a little more restaurant driven for your wholesale buyer, right? So
right. Not quite as competitive of a market as the chicken industry, and then a little bit easier to actually differentiate the product. I hate to say it, but in lots of ways, when they give you that expression, tastes like chicken, I mean, we raised a really, really nice chicken, but it's a lot harder to differentiate a chicken, and the American consumer sees chicken as expecting it to be the cheapest protein regardless. I always told people, I think there was people that left their house saying, man, I want to go have one of Gunthorp's pork chops. There's people left their house saying, man, I want to go have one of Gunthorp's duck breast. there's lots of people leave to go to a nice restaurant to have a steak. I don't think there's lots of people that ever get up and say, man, I want to go have a chicken breast tonight. There's people that order that, but I don't think that's what they leave their house for, So and if you look back, Will Harris, he sends me a picture every once in a while of a menu from the early 1900s, things like 1916 or something. Back then, chicken was as expensive on the menu as a steak was. That's definitely not the case anywhere anymore. And I think when you're going to raise things on pasture, I think it's actually, especially since the whole labor cost and availability shift, and then the feed price shift, I think it's actually just as expensive to raise a chicken as it is a grass-fed beef. And the marketplace for sure won't pay that.
Mm-hmm. That is true. And
Yep.
It's it's all a matter of perception, isn't it?
Right, it is. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the chicken industry's done one thing really, really good. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of the chicken industry, but they took that expression, the chicken in every pot, and they ran with it. It's 90 some pounds for every man, woman, and child per year now. And it's supposed to be cheap, and it's supposed to be plentiful, and people are just supposed to be able to eat it all the time. But, it in lots of ways, the typical Cornish cross, especially raised in a barn, 36 to 39 days old, I think it's nothing more than a medium for a marinate in lots of ways. It's as bland as you can get. And, short of raising some different genetics, which we did some, but that even drives your cost worse. We did some Imperial Reds, and there's some options for some chickens with more flavor, but the breast meat is 25 to 40% less, and the birds take twice as long out in the field, and they process a little bit harder, and they're but it's I don't know so I don't see us going back to chickens. I wish I could say that we would, and I think the guys doing the direct to consumer, I still think there's a lot of opportunities in pasture poultry, and I think it's a great model, and much larger percentage of the chicken in the U.S. should actually be out on grass, green grass, fresh air, and some exercise. It's much better for the chicken and much better for the person that consumes it.
Yeah, when you see some of the pictures of chicken feet and they have the ammonia burn on them from being inside of the barns, compared to pasture, it's just amazing the difference in the quality of life that the animal can have on pasture. And
night and day difference.
It blows my mind how far we've in the name of efficiency, how far we've gone. And and we don't even stop to recognize that, I don't believe.
No,
that's just the way it is. We have to do it to keep costs down. At what expense, right?
Right. And I think it's got so bad that I think a large percentage of the people in rural America, even ones that grew up on farms, really don't have any clue the scale that industrial livestock and poultry production has got to. I don't think that they realize that, there's 8.7 billion chickens raised a year, and it's only 20,000 growers that raise them all. I don't think that they realize that, half of the dairy cows now are controlled by 3% of the dairy farms. Pigs are just as bad. I think it's 30 hog farms in the country is more than 2/3 of the hogs. Average egg laying house is over 1 million hens now. And I think that changed so fast. And I like I said, I don't even think the people in rural America that grew up on farms realize it's those kind of numbers now.
It is amazing. So what's wrong with that? Is that good or is that bad?
No one, I think, can ever fault commodity agriculture for as productive and as efficient it is, but it has an awful lot of hidden cost. And I think that COVID showed us those. Guys like me and lots of my friends have been talking about this forever, but no one really listened before COVID. And I think one of the biggest flaws in the system is resiliency. When their system is clicking, like I said, no one can fault it for its productivity and its efficiency, but it's not really resilient. And I think the biggest fault of it is that from a national security, from a food security standpoint, I think that we'd have been a lot better off to have not blown up the independent traditional family farm model. And then beyond that, it's got a lot more issues. I think I would tell people jokingly, but it's actually really not funny. The two biggest exports off from farms over the years has been our kids and our topsoil. We have a serious brain drain in rural America, and it's because there isn't really lots of opportunities, or people don't see lots of opportunities. And I think that local food and sustainable agriculture has a really big opportunity in changing that. And then, there's just a lot of faults in the system. We send an awful lot of nutrients down the river. The Gulf is not even suitable for fishing in lots of areas, and it's because of the amount of fertilizer that it's not just used, but that it leaves farms. That's just a huge waste. And then you look at food insecurity issues. Some of the most productive areas of agriculture in the United States are also some of the most food insecure regions of our country. Poverty in rural America is atrocious. The economic metrics of rural America look worse than the inner cities. So this whole idea of efficiency, it all really comes down to a system of haves and have-nots. And, I think that I don't want to go preaching too much, but this ends up becoming an ethical issue. It long-term becomes an issue of income inequality and wealth inequality. And there's a handful of farmers out here in rural America that have done quite well in this system. Typically very large commodity operations. And there's an awful lot of rural America that's been left behind by this system. And that's the thing that I talk about most. Food that tastes better. Yeah, that'd be great. And there's a small percentage of the population that really likes that. Less environmental problems, stuff going down the river, less antibiotic resistant bacteria. I mean, the emissions coming off from, so that we can actually breathe the air, because EPA gives farmers a huge amount of exemptions compared to industry. And at some point, we probably have to realize that the level of agriculture nowadays is probably industry, and it's not, the exemptions gave because of family farms. And I'm not advocating for more regulations. I'm actually probably, if you put me on the spectrum, I'm probably a libertarian on that regards, and believe that the marketplace ought to fix this stuff. But the marketplace is probably kind of dysfunctional too. So I guess
you know what, the marketplace can't fix itself if the marketplace doesn't know. And there's two things. There's the information is hidden from the consumer, but then the consumer honestly is still apathetic in making that decision, right? So when it comes down to it, if you knew the true externalized costs of the food that you're eating, but it was still cheaper, the consumer is still going to choose cheaper. You know what I mean? There is that disconnect to it, right?
Right. And, and there's a huge amount of externalized cost, and, part of that efficiency and productivity that we can't take away from agriculture is part of that is that they've been really, really good at shifting those risks from themselves to not just consumers, but also to the farmers that produce for them. And they've done that, and we've lost our share of the retail dollar. And most commodity farmers on the livestock and poultry side don't even own the animals on their farm anymore. So I mean, and they say that for risk shifting, but we've seen at the beginning of COVID, those contracts necessarily aren't any good when the packer won't honor them. So I mean, did they really shift risk? All they did was shift all the reward to the packer, and they're still taking the risk of having a live animal that they can't do anything with. So, I mean, the system is, yeah. So I guess the system does have its problems, and I think that long term we'd all be better off if a much larger portion of the system went in a different direction.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things I like that you said there early on is people, you corrected yourself. You say, oh, people don't have the opportunities. And then you said, no. People don't see the opportunities. And I think that's a real key, is that you see where those opportunities are at, Greg. And how do you encourage other people to see opportunities in what they're doing that they may not see today? What are some things that you think have been good for you that always are allowing you to ask those questions or to see things differently?
Oh man, that's a great question. That's probably something we could talk for a couple hours on. But the good friend of mine, Steve Bonney, ran a nonprofit group called Sustainable Earth, and I would say that he probably helped me as much as anything in that, seeing that we're not just producing commodities, we're actually producing products that turn into food. And there's 300 and some million people in the United States, and they eat an awful lot of food. And there are so many opportunities to produce things on farms and to connect with those consumers. And I think that I actually think it's becoming more trendy now. But it's I think one of the biggest obstacles to it is I think it's still difficult to step out of that. We're just going to raise crops or we're just going to raise animals, because I think rural communities are actually quite rough on farmers that do step out of that paradigm. I think it's getting a little better, but they're kind of rough on that. I would say that, and maybe it's changed a little bit now, but at first, was labeled the granola crunching hippie farmer that wasn't smart enough to put up barns for his hogs, and guys that direct market now, they're, the commodity guys look at them, it's like, oh, why would they do that? But, it's that I think there's a large amount of loyalty in connecting to the end consumer, and there's a huge opportunity in capturing a larger portion of that retail dollar. And I think that as the younger generation, I think the land grant university, I went to Purdue, and my oldest daughter went to Purdue, both in the ag econ department. I think Dr. Hurt down there says it takes 1,500 acres per family member now to have a full-time job on the farm. And we have close to 20 employees on 275 acres, and my wife and I, plus my son, fully employed on the farm. So I think we kind of break the rules, and I think there's lots of opportunities for people to come back to the farm, whether that's something in the organic industry, or whether that's something in the grass-fed beef or sheep industry, or whether that's pastured pigs or pastured poultry. There are just so many ways to step out of that commodity paradigm and capture a premium for something that probably takes a little bit either more labor or more management or a little bit of both. But those were the things that farmers that kept them on the land, rather than getting out the checkbook and writing things for that your money goes off the farm immediately.
Yeah, but you don't get to go to Florida in the winter, and you don't Deere and Company doesn't get to have the $2 billion profit quarters, if you do
right.
things. But no, that's pretty amazing. 20 people on 275 acres. You definitely, you really screwed up the data points there, Greg. You're an outlier, so they'll just kick that out of the data set. That don't count.
Right. Yeah.
So what do you see some ways that technology coming into, farmers that want to go direct to consumer that makes it easier than ever before today to start doing it compared to when you started in, 94 and 98? And what are some things you see in the future that's going to make it even easier for a farmer that would want to diversify, have a more regenerative approach by integrating livestock onto their land, and to have a more diversified income approach? Just as you look across things, why do you think it's, I contend it's easier than ever before today, and it'll be even easier in the future. You can tell me if you think I'm wrong there, but what are some things you see coming together to make it any farmer able to do this if they really wanted to?
Are you talking just the marketing end, or are you talking the whole
I'm talking
spectrum?
whether you are growing, you want to grow diversified crops to market crops for produce or specialty grains, or whether you're integrating livestock, pastured production, those kind of things.
Okay.
Any way that farmer can connect direct to consumer.
Okay. Well, I'm going to answer that in what might be an odd way, but I'm going to come the whole way from production, processing, and I'm going to talk about the marketing. And on the production side, I would say that if my grandpa was still alive today, he'd be extremely proud of what we're doing. But he would also just shake his head on how easy we have it to raise pigs outside. Compared to what he had it when he was my age, or my especially compared to when he was my son's age. And those are the things like we have energy-free waters with buried plastic line now that compared to my grandpa that used to have to fill the 80-gallon waters and guess pretty close to the amount that the sows or pigs were going to drink in 24 hours, so that little, we call them smudge pots, that little kerosene heater underneath the thing would keep the trough from being completely froze by the next day. We have large squares and big round bales of straw to bed huts. And we have hydraulic trailers to move pigs around and can back in under huts and just take huts around, where they had to, every single bit of the straw was done with small squares. And the huts were on wooden skids that you just closed your eyes and crossed your fingers every time you hooked onto them, hoping that the runners didn't pull out of the things when you hooked onto them. Where now we back the hydraulic trailer under the thing, pick them up. We've got 30, 40 joule fence chargers with temporary electric fence that we can put animals exactly where we want them, and with pretty good peace of mind know that that's where they're going to be when we come back. Where it took woven wire fence before, and you really couldn't put animals into different locations, and you couldn't strip graze, and you couldn't rotationally graze, and you couldn't hog down corn and all that as easily and as efficiently as you can do now. So there's a bunch of stuff on mechanical front wheel assist tractors that side by sides and four wheelers to get around. I can take my phone out of my pocket right now, and on Field Margin app, I can tell you where every group of our animals are right now and where they were. And all of our records are on the phone. So I mean, people tend to say that us regenerative pasture farmers are anti-technology. And I'd say we're actually pro-appropriate technology. And in the processing plant is kind of the same way. We have a little bit of current technology in the processing plant, but just like the farm, lots of our stuff in the processing plant, we tend to stay 1 or 2 generations behind the industry, just because we're not big fans of buying things that rust, rot, and depreciate. So if we can buy a used large piece of equipment in the processing plant, it's just way, way more efficient for us than what we were doing before by hand. And, it's not $100,000 piece of machinery. For example, our skinner for our pigs that takes the rind off from it. We bought that used for $4,000. It was a 1972 Morel. It worked completely fine for us. Nowadays, the industry, that's done on a conveyor. The bellies are just dropped on a machine, and they come out the other side with the skin off. Lots of the plants, the barrel portion of the pig, the skin comes off. So, older technology still works for us. On the marketing side, the ability to connect with consumers nowadays without even having to leave the farm is so much more tremendous nowadays than it was even when we started. You alluded to it earlier. There wasn't even the internet really. I guess there was. It was on a few email listservs, if you remember those back in the day. But there wasn't like the internet that we have now, and there wasn't web pages and all that kind of stuff. So, it's a lot easier to connect with consumers. It's a lot easier to communicate with consumers. It's a lot easier to access to platforms that you can sell your products on. It's just even a lot easier to get access to resources and information, on the production, the processing, and the marketing side. When we first started, there was not things like the Niche Meat Processing Assistance Network, which is part of Oregon State's extension. If you had questions on processing, you had to go research it somewhere, and there wasn't even the internet to look it up on. And nowadays there's technical resources available for that at the touch of your finger on the computer. It's changed immensely. So yeah, in some ways it's more difficult. I'd probably argue that in some ways, but in lots of ways, it's just so much easier and more accessible to do.
Yeah, great points. I was just thinking back what you're saying on the production side. Yeah, there is a lot of things. When we had hogs out on pasture, we didn't have polywire.
Right.
Some people may had a high or what was it, low, whichever, the older version of a shocker with a single wire with some metal posts with insulators in the ground that just never did work that well. But yeah, it's come a long way there to being able to pasture pork out on the field. Well,
yeah, my dad still doesn't believe this whole idea that you can just run high tensile wire out there and that you don't have to take all of the weeds off, because he remembers the days of the weed zappers that they were straight 110 and it just like made that large chopping noise and actually just cut the power, and first weed on the thing and the fence was dead. These low impedance chargers nowadays, man, I don't think you can put enough weeds that I'd want to grab a hold of the fence still.
That is for sure. Well, we got a few minutes left here. Anything that we should have visited about today, Greg, that I didn't bring up in our time together?
Not a lot. I think the one thing, and I'm on a processor to processor peer group, and I think the one thing that lots of us in the direct marketing space forget, and I've been as guilty of it as anyone. I think that we have to remember that ultimately our business comes down to that we have to solve a problem for our consumer rather than finding a consumer that solves the problem for us. And our business clearly went to direct marketing because we were commodity producers and the commodity market no longer worked. But I can't look for a consumer that wants to keep me in a basically in the commodity market doing something different than commodity producers. I have to find a consumer, and we have to produce a product that actually fits their needs. And I think when you do that, it's semantics in a way, but it's definitely not semantics, and it makes the business function a lot better.
Well, it's a mindset, really, and that's
right.
What allows you to preserve the value that you're creating. Instead of creating a commodity that makes it as cheap as possible, you're trying to preserve the value of what you're creating and get it to the right person in the way they want it.
And then And then one other thing, and my son would be upset if I didn't mention this because I have to mention this everywhere, and I get my phone out at events and stuff. I always challenge everybody, and same thing for us. Our address is 435 North, 850 East. We're just south of Mongo. I always challenge everybody that anyone you talk to, any farm you see, whatever, pull them up on Google Earth or pull them up on the satellite version of maps. I think that has as much value as certifications. I don't think that we need a lot of education to consumers. They pull up an operation like ours. You can tell from the satellite whether we're doing what we say we're doing, and you can tell from satellites on some of those others when you're in the store. When you're back home, pull them up, see what they look like from space. And I challenge everybody, see what our place looks like from space. Ours is actually pretty cool. It sticks out like a sore thumb in the community from satellites.
Well, that is neat. And I've also enjoyed doing that too. You can see people who've been long-term no-till cover crop practitioners compared to people who've been full-till, with nothing. You can see the difference in the darkness of the soil from the satellites. And yeah, you can see the difference in how you're raising the animals. So Kim's writing down right now. She's going to put a link in there. So everybody's going to be zooming in on your farm. So
okay, yeah, I'll wave at them.
You see a bunch of satellites over top your farm every day now.
Yeah, just tell them keep the balloons home.
Shoot. Anyway, no, Greg, I really admire what you've done, and just you're a pioneer in doing what you've done. And a neat part of you provide a model that others can follow. Oftentimes, a friend of mine says the second mouse gets the cheese. So you have survived the first mouse traps and have been successful and continue to do great things. And it's neat to see what you're doing to meet customers' needs and provide amazing opportunities for your community. So just congratulations on all that you've done there and the impact that you've made. You're an example to follow.
Thank you.
So invite's always open. If you find yourself over in the Quad City direction, you're welcome to stop by and say hi. I find myself in Indiana. I might, now that I got your address that you just gave away, I might just drop in someday.
Yeah, please do. If you ever go east on the Indiana toll road, jump off at South Bend onto US 20. It won't take you any longer to get back to when you're in Ohio on the toll road, and you'll literally go through the center of the farm. And please do stop.
Perfect. Looking forward to it. Well, hey, everyone. Greg and I were talking after the recording, and he reminded me we forgot to talk about sheep and the solar project and what you got going on there. Tell us a little bit about your sheep enterprise, your lamb enterprise, and what you have going there and your grazing in the solar panels.
Okay. Yeah. We got a couple flocks of hair ewes, some Katahdin Dorpers. A couple years ago, we got our first ones, and I think we really lucked out because our first ones had zero hoof problems and zero parasite problems, and we really enjoy the things actually. But they're grass-fed, seasonal, pasture lambing operation. And we have close to 600 ewes on the farm now. The numbers of sheep can grow quite fast when, you can end up growing the flock by about 50% each year. But the coolest opportunity that we have with the sheep now is that I've been watching, I got a couple friends, the Hendricks family down in Missouri and Will Harris and the White Oaks group down in Southwest Georgia have been getting paid to control vegetation on solar farms. And it somewhat kind of reminds me of our starting into the direct marketing, because I've made an awful lot of cold calls. And I think that we've actually made a connection now. It sure looks like that starting next spring, we'll have our sheep will no longer spend the grazing season here. They're going to be on about 800 acres of British Petroleum light sources, one of their solar farms west of here. And they're going to be keeping the grass down to a level that the panels won't be shaded. And it's a win-win situation because it's And I think from a business standpoint, win-win situations are the things that work best for sure. And, sheep actually can control vegetation on solar farms, and the farmer can get paid. And that can be a lower cost for the solar farms than them hiring mowing crews. And, as the whole labor challenge become availability and cost goes higher, you can imagine it's only going to get more expensive for them to mow and control the grass and weeds under these solar panels. And sheep love to do it. And, so the sheep market and the goat market, which we don't have goats, but sheep and goat market is one of the few commodity livestock markets that is still strong. We have these, 50, 60 pound fat lambs that have never seen any grain. They're finished in the same season that they're lambed in. So the only thing in the winter that we have is dry ewes that can take really low quality hay. And these fat finished lambs go to the auction, and 30 to 50% of the lambs in the United States, depending on the week, are these whole lambs going into the ethnic market. And those aren't really influenced yet. And I say yet because, I have a long history of watching commodity markets tank, but so far, these small 40 to 60 pound finished lambs, the last 10 years have been selling for $2.50 to $4 a pound at the auction. And so we've been getting good price selling them live and not having to process them. And obviously we process a few at the farm, but our goal really is to have a diversified income stream and a diversified product that we don't have to rely on having to staff our plant and having to figure out how to sell all of the pieces from a different product. So we're really, really excited about the solar grazing opportunity.
Yeah, plus it integrates well with what you're doing on the pork in your winter for cleanup, if you will, where paddocks that maybe are regenerating from where the hogs have been. So it's a good mix there, and you're solving a problem. They don't have to pay somebody to mow it or to employ it, and you're getting essentially free feed, if you will.
Right.
Win-win for everybody.
Now, we should have had sheep on the farm for the last 20 years. What they do for the pastures is just amazing. We've spent a boatload of money over the last 20 years in labor, fuel, and tractors in mowing pastures to keep them in condition to run pork and poultry across them. And we should have been doing sheep. I mean, not that we needed another plate to spin, but if I had it to do over again, that's probably my biggest mistake. So we should have bought a flock of sheep 20 some years ago.
Now, the key word there is, though, Greg, keeping them on the farm. It's one thing bringing them to the farm, keeping them on the farm is the other thing. Them suckers like to get away, don't they?
And I think wool sheep would be worse. But yeah, hair sheep, and we found out this year, we had a really dry fall, and as the ground gets drier, their hair gets longer, the pasture gets shorter. They can see the grass on the other side. They get a lot more stubborn. They get a lot more difficult to keep in. We didn't have quite that problem last year, but we had a lot more rain, and the grass was a lot nicer. So the ground was better conductive too, and they weren't as hungry, So yeah, it's they're definitely have their challenges. There's a reason that most of the cattle guys won't have a sheep on the farm, but we like them.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing that, Greg. And that's another way to think about how to create more revenue. Or maybe if you had a farm ground that was taken away that was part of a solar project, doesn't mean that just because you can't grow corn and soybeans on it now, that you can't create revenue by grazing underneath those panels. So I think agrovoltaics is a topic that we need to take a look at in the future, because as we pursue other energy sources that include solar, that's going to be something that's definitely needed. So, well, Greg, thanks for your time today, and thank you for all that you do to provide great food that people can trust, and for your leadership that you're providing for other farmers to follow and do what you're doing.
Thank you.
What a great conversation. We should probably give college credit for this crash course in ag production. Hearing Greg and Monty discuss all these twists and turns has hopefully got your wheels turning. And as always, if you'd like to learn more about what's possible for your own farming and ranching system, check out our website at asn.farm, and there you can click on links to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. There's a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.